Welcome back to Cool English. Today, we're going to focus on a very important C1 level skill: how to express your opinion clearly, confidently, and naturally in English. At an advanced level, giving your opinion is not just about saying what you think. It's about how you present your ideas, how you sound to others, and how you respond when people disagree with you. Let's start with a common problem. Many learners say things like, "I think it's good," or "I don't like it." These sentences are correct, but at C1 level, they sound too basic and sometimes too direct. A strong C1 speaker adds depth, reasoning, and softness to their opinion. Let's look at how to do that. First, instead of saying "I think," try using more advanced opinion starters. For example, you can say, "In my view, from my perspective, as far as I'm concerned, personally speaking." These expressions sound more natural and more academic, especially in discussions or presentations. Now let's build on that. At C1 level, your opinion should usually include a reason. You're not just stating an idea. You're explaining why you feel that way. For example, instead of saying, "I think working from home is better," you can say, "In my view, working from home is more effective because it allows people to focus without constant interruptions." Notice how this sounds more confident and more thoughtful. Now let's talk about strong opinions. Sometimes you want to show that you feel very strongly about something. In that case, you can use expressions like, "I strongly believe that," "I'm firmly convinced that," "There's no doubt in my mind that." For example, "I strongly believe that governments should invest more in education, as it has a long-term impact on society." However, be careful. In real conversations, strong opinions can sound aggressive if you're not polite. That's why C1 speakers also know how to soften their opinions. To soften your opinion, you can use phrases like, "I tend to think that," "It seems to me that," "I might be wrong, but," "I'm not entirely convinced that." For example, "I might be wrong, but it seems to me that social media has changed the way people communicate, not always in a positive way." This shows confidence and openness at the same time. Now let's move on to something even more important: agreeing and disagreeing politely. At C1 level, simply saying "I disagree" can sound too direct. Instead, you can say, "I see your point, but I look at it slightly differently." That's an interesting perspective. However, I'm not sure I fully agree. "I understand what you're saying, but from my point of view." For example, "I understand what you're saying about online learning, but from my point of view, face-to-face interaction is still essential." This kind of language is especially useful in meetings, debates, and exams like IELTS or Cambridge. Now let's practice expressing a balanced opinion. A balanced opinion means you recognize both sides before giving your final view. For example, "While I understand the advantages of artificial intelligence, I believe we also need to consider its impact on employment." This structure shows maturity and critical thinking, very important at C1 level. Another useful expression is, "On the one hand," "On the other hand." For example, "On the one hand, remote work offers flexibility. On the other hand, it can lead to isolation. Overall, I believe a hybrid system is the best solution." Now let's talk about ending your opinion clearly. You can conclude by saying, "Overall, I believe that, all things considered. To sum up, in my opinion, For example, all things considered, I believe that learning to express your opinion clearly is one of the most valuable communication skill in English. Before we finish, let me give you one final piece of advice. At C1 level, it's not about sounding complicated. It's about sounding clear, natural, and confident. If you can express your opinion with reasons, soften it when necessary, and respond politely to others, you are already thinking in English at an advanced level. That's it for today's lesson on expressing opinions in English. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Cool English.